Solomon Vance was 40 years old the afternoon. His wife sat across from a woman she had never properly looked at and explained in careful detail exactly how she intended to take everything he had. She was in a boutique wealth management office on Charlotte Avenue in Nashville, a place she had been visiting for 3 months, drawn in initially by a referral from a friend, and kept there by the particular comfort of a woman who listened without judgment and asked the right questions and never seemed to push. The office had warm lighting and good coffee, and the kind of unhurried quiet that made people say things they had rehearsed in their heads but never said out loud. She laid it out completely. The offshore transfers she had already begun, the business valuation she had commissioned in secret, which underreported equity by a figure she named specifically. The timeline, 8 months, she said, beginning with the filing. She had a divorce attorney already retained. She used the word clean 3 times to describe what she wanted the outcome to look like. What Simone did not know, what she had not once considered in the 3 months of those comfortable, confiding conversations, was that the woman across the desk, Claudette Marsh, had worked for Solomon Vance for 6 years. She ran the boutique as a legitimate business. She was also, quietly and without advertisement, a licensed investigator and the operational lead of Solomon's Nashville office. She had not recorded the first 2 conversations. She had recorded the third, the one where Simone named numbers. The recording was 41 minutes long. Solomon had listened to all of it. What Simone had walked into, dressed in the confidence of a plan she believed was already working, was a room that already belonged to the man she was trying to leave behind. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The November light came through the windows of Solomon's home office in long, pale bands, the kind of light that is more thought than warmth, and he was at his desk with the third coffee of the morning and a legal pad he had been writing on for 2 hours, not drafting anything formal, just thinking the way he had always thought, in columns and sequences, in the particular visual grammar of a man who had spent 15 years making invisible things legible. His grandmother, Ida Mae Vance, had raised him in a house in North Nashville on a pension and the proceeds of a notary and document services business she ran from the front room, one of those practical, quiet enterprises that existed at the intersection of paperwork and trust. She stamped documents for people in the neighborhood who needed things made official, deeds, affidavits, powers of attorney, and she did it with the same unhurried precision she brought to every task. And over the years, she had developed an understanding of how information was moved through the legal and financial world that was deeper and more practical than most of the people who had formal credentials in those areas. She had 2 things she said often enough that they became the interior wallpaper of his childhood. The first was baby. Information is the only currency that doesn't lose value. The second, specifically when he was impatient or had moved too fast, was, you cannot rush the picture into focus, you have to let it develop. She had been gone for 9 years. He heard both lines regularly, in the particular way of the dead, whose wisdom has been fully absorbed into how a person moves through the world. He had built his firm, Vance Strategic Group, from those 2 principles. It was not a large firm in visible terms. 3 offices, 12 full-time people, a client roster that included 4 regional banks, 2 major law firms, a family office in Atlanta, and, through a retainer arrangement he rarely mentioned, a division of the federal judiciary whose name he did not use in conversation. He drove a truck that was 7 years old. He wore clothes that were clean and well-fitted and purchased without drama. He had met Simone at a charity gala in Brentwood 8 years ago, when he was just building the firm's reputation and she was running marketing for a luxury residential developer. She was beautiful in the particular way of someone who had worked hard to be underestimated and decided at some point to stop. He had liked that about her immediately. He had liked the ambition. He had not understood until recently the full shape of how it ran. She was downstairs now. He could hear her moving through the kitchen. The specific efficiency of her morning routine, which had not changed in 8 years and which he had long ago memorized the way you memorize the sound of a machine you are responsible for maintaining. He listened to it the same way he listened to everything in those weeks, not for comfort but for information, for the gap between the pattern and the deviation. He had not found a deviation in her routine since the day Claudette first mentioned, carefully, that Simone had come in for what she thought was a 3rd introductory appointment. Claudette had not made it seem significant. She was too good at her work to make anything seem significant. He had met Simone at that Brentwood gala, and they had danced badly and laughed about, and she had told him very directly, over a terrible glass of white wine, that she had decided to stop pretending to be less interesting than she was, and she wanted to know if he could keep up. He had said he thought he could manage. That night had been genuine. He did not revise it. The first years had been real. The arguments and the reconciliations and the Saturday mornings in the market and the long drives through Middle Tennessee when she would read aloud from whatever book she was in the middle of, and he would just drive and listen. He had loved her well and specifically and without reservation. He did not know when the calculation had entered. He suspected it had entered slowly, the way all structural damage enters, invisibly from the inside in the places that bear the most weight. His phone, the one he used for work, not the one she would recognize, buzzed once on the corner of the desk. A calendar reminder he had set for himself 3 weeks ago, when he first understood the shape of what was happening. It said simply, "Time to develop the picture." He closed the legal pad. He stood. He went downstairs and poured himself a fourth coffee and told Simone good morning. And she said good morning back without looking up from her phone, and neither of them said anything else for a while, which had become its own kind of answer. He listened to the recording on a Tuesday morning in a conference room at Claudette's boutique, after hours, with the blinds down and the door locked. Claudette sat across from him with her hands folded on the table, and her expression composed in the professional neutrality she wore the way other people wore reading glasses naturally, and at the exact moments it was most needed. The recording opened with small talk, Simone asking about the coffee, Claudette complimenting her earrings. Then, with the ease of someone who has been building toward a conversation for weeks, Simone began. His hands did not move from the table. His face remained completely still. She had already moved $63,000 from their joint investment account to a personal account at an institution in Tennessee she had opened 6 months prior. She described this matter-of-factly, the way you describe a logistical step. She had engaged a forensic accountant, to produce an alternate business valuation for Vance Strategic Group that she said would show significantly lower equity than what he reports to the IRS. She named a figure, $2.1 million, as opposed to what she believed the actual value to be, which she estimated at somewhere between $6 and $8 million. She was planning, she said, to file in Davidson County, where she had found an attorney who was very experienced with complex asset cases involving private firms. She had a timeline, 8 months, structured in 3 phases. The first phase was already underway. She paused once in the recording. Claudette's voice, perfectly level, said, "And what about the house?" Simone said the house was in both names, but she had already spoken to a title, attorney about options. She spoke for 31 more minutes after that. Solomon listened to all of it without moving. When the recording ended, he sat with the silence for a moment. Then he reached across the table and pressed stop on the device and said, very quietly, "Thank you, Claudette." She nodded once. She did not add anything. She understood, as she always understood, that some moments required nothing more than acknowledgement. He moved with the same deliberate calm that had always defined him, the same measured attention he brought to every client engagement, every threat assessment, every case where the facts were uncomfortable and the only useful response was clarity. He was not angry. He noted to himself with the precision of a man cataloging his own internal weather, entirely clear. He opened his laptop. He opened a folder he had created 3 weeks ago when Claudette first mentioned the third appointment. He named it simply Simone, and then he began to build the record that proved what the recording had already told him. He called 3 people in the following 2 weeks in sequence, and each call was brief and specific and produced exactly what he asked for. The first was Dwight Okafor, the attorney who handled all of Vance Strategic's corporate structure, a careful, methodical man in his late 50s who practiced out of a small but deliberate office in Germantown, and who had been structuring the firm's holding arrangements since Solomon founded it. Dwight listened to Solomon's summary without interruption. He asked 2 questions. He said, "How long do you want before we proceed?" Solomon told him. Dwight said, "I'll have the documentation ready by Thursday." What Dwight knew, and Simone's attorney did not know, was that Vance Strategic Group's publicly facing entity, the one incorporated in Tennessee, the one with the Davidson County address, the one that appeared in any standard business search, was not the primary asset holding structure. It was one layer of a structure Dwight had designed over 7 years, one that included 2 holding companies, a family trust established in Solomon's grandmother's name in 2019, and a real estate portfolio titled under a management entity whose name bore no visible connection to Solomon's own. The $2.1 million valuation Simone's accountant had produced was not fraudulent. It was simply the value of the part of the building she could see. She had not thought to check for floors above the ceiling she was standing under. The second call was to Marcus Webb, who had been Solomon's chief of 4 years and before that had spent 11 years as a financial crimes analyst. Marcus was quiet and thorough and had a memory for financial structures that bordered on the architectural. Solomon gave him the account number from the receiving institution Simone had mentioned in the recording. He said, "Tell me everything that number connects to." Marcus said he would call back by end of week. He called back in 2 days. What Marcus found was not a hidden network. It was a small, neat picture of someone who had been patient and careful and had, in her patience and care, made a series of errors that were individually defensible and collectively damning. The $63,000 in transfers. A second tranche of $29,000 moved 4 months earlier that Simone had not mentioned in the recording, perhaps because she had forgotten it, or perhaps because she had assumed it was too small to surface. A shared account with a man named Vincent Howell, a Nashville-based commercial real estate agent whose professional relationship with Simone predated her marriage to Solomon by 3 years, and whose personal relationship with her, based on the documentation Marcus assembled, predated it by $292,000 in total, over 14 months. Beginning 11 months after the wedding, Solomon received Marcus's report on a Thursday morning, sitting in his truck in the parking lot of a hardware store he had pulled into for no particular reason, and he read it twice and then set the phone face down on the passenger seat and looked out at the ordinary motion of a Thursday morning. A woman loading bags into a minivan, a man on a phone call pacing in front of a storefront, and he felt the particular quality of a man who has been reading a document for a long time and has finally reached the last page, and it confirms exactly what the first page suggested. He picked the phone back up. He said, "Phyllis, it's time. I need you in Nashville by Monday." Phyllis Brandt was 60 years old, had practiced family law in Atlanta for 31 years, and was the person Dwight Okafor had told Solomon years earlier to call if he ever found himself in a room where the other side thought they held the cards. She arrived on Sunday evening. They met for 2 hours at Claudette's boutique, the 3 of them at the long table with the good coffee and the warm light, and by the time she left, the architecture of what came next was complete. He drove home through the Sunday dark of Nashville, past the lit windows and the bare November trees, and he thought about his grandmother in the front room with her notary stamp and her ledger and her absolute, undecorated understanding of how information moved and what it was worth. He had been paying attention since he was 11 years old. Some things you were too well trained to stop doing. In the 2 weeks before the mediation, he went home every evening and ate dinner with Simone and spoke when spoken to, and once drove her to the airport for a business trip to Dallas and waited at the curb while she checked her bag. She kissed his cheek on her way out. He watched her walk through the sliding doors. She was very good at the performance of normalcy, and he acknowledged this without any particular feeling about it. He had been good at it longer than she had. One evening she asked him if he'd thought any more about the kitchen renovation they'd discussed in the spring. He said he had been thinking about it. She said she was leaning toward marble countertops over quartz. He said marble required more maintenance. She said she knew that. That was part of the appeal. He nodded and poured her a glass of water and said he would look into it. He did not look into it. He was watching. He was waiting. The discipline was not difficult. He had been trained in more demanding versions of it. The mediation was held the following month, on a Wednesday, in the offices of a downtown firm on Fifth Avenue North. Simone arrived with her attorney, a man named Garrett Finch, who had a manner Solomon recognized immediately from his years of professional risk assessment, the specific projective confidence of a man who has been told the other side doesn't know how to fight back. She sat down across the table. She had not seen Solomon since the previous week, when they had eaten dinner together in the kitchen of the house on Belle Meade Boulevard without either of them saying anything that mattered. She looked at him, now with the composed certainty of someone who believes they are about to watch a door open in the direction they have been pushing. He looked back at her with nothing in particular on his face. Phyllis Brandt was to his left. Dwight Okafor was to his right. At the end of the table, in the chair she had settled into with the unhurried authority of someone who had sat at the end of many tables, was Claudette Marsh. Finch opened. He went through the marital asset inventory his team had prepared, the house, the firm, the joint accounts, the retirement instruments. He had clearly done work. The valuation his expert had produced for Vance Strategic was in the packet, $2.1 million. He presented it without apology. Phyllis let him finish. She had a way of listening that was indistinguishable from patience, and when the room went quiet, she opened the first of 3 folders she had placed in front of her, and did not look up. "We'd like to address the marital asset inventory," she said, starting with several items that appeared to have been excluded from the opposing party's filing. She slid the first document across the table. It was the holding company structure, all of it documented, current, with Dwight's certification attached. The total equity was not $2.1 million. It was $7.8 million, and Dwight had the records going back to inception. Finch looked at the document. He looked at his client. Something shifted in the room. Phyllis opened the second folder. "We'd also like to address the asset movement that predates the filing." She read the figures without theater. 63. $29,000. The receiving account, Marcus Webb's report, certified and attached. The name Vincent Howell appeared 3 times in the summary. The total documented transfer is $92,000 over 14 months. Tennessee law on marital asset dissipation is clear on premeditated transfers of this kind, and we intend to ask the court for full recovery plus applicable damages. She opened the third folder. She slid it toward Finch, but she was looking at Simone. Finally, she said, "We'd like to note that some of the strategy documented in this proceeding was developed in what your client believed to be a private consultation." She placed the written transcript, not the recording, just the transcript, 7 pages of it, clean and time-stamped, on top of the folder. "The consultation was not private. We have the complete record." The room was very quiet for a long time. Simone looked at Claudette. Claudette returned her gaze with the professional composure she brought to every room she sat in, the same composure she had maintained across 3 months of careful coffee and warm light. Simone looked at Solomon. He was looking at her with the same expression she had seen across the kitchen table for 8 years, calm, attentive, reading the room. He had always been reading the room. She understood now, in the specific clarity of a moment that cannot be taken back, that she had never once understood how well. "I'm not here to humiliate you," Solomon said. He spoke quietly, without theater, without anything in his voice that needed to be performed. "I want you to understand something. What you planned was thorough. It was patient. It was better than most of what I see in my professional work." He let that settle. "You simply didn't know what room you were planning it in." He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He gathered nothing because he had brought nothing. Everything that mattered was already in the record. He walked out. He did not look back. Behind him, Phyllis remained at the table with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had many more documents to discuss. Passed. Nashville moved through a full winter and into a spring that came early and stayed, the way springs sometimes do in Tennessee, with a generosity that feels almost like apology for the months before. Solomon bought a house in East Nashville, a 1930s craftsman on a street of old oaks, nothing dramatic, the kind of house that reveals its quality slowly, through the fit of the doors and the depth of the original millwork and the way the morning light moves through the rooms as though it has done this before and knows exactly where to go. He was restoring it room by room on his own time, in the same methodical way he approached everything. The kitchen was finished. He had started on the study. A woman named Diana Falk came to dinner on a Thursday in April. She was a civil litigation attorney, had grown up in Memphis, had a directness about her that she deployed without apology, and had asked Solomon, when they were introduced at a professional event 3 months earlier, a question about corporate intelligence methodology that had been both precisely correct and genuinely interesting. They had talked for 90 minutes without noticing the time. She came to dinner, and they cooked together in the new kitchen, and she told him she had been thinking about what he had said about information and patience, and he said he thought his grandmother had put it better than he ever had. She asked what his grandmother had said. He told her. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said that sounded exactly right. Simone had retained new counsel after the mediation, but the outcome had not changed materially. The full asset picture, all of it, Dwight's structures included, had been entered into the record. The court had applied the dissipation credit in full. Her valuation expert's report had been formally challenged and substantially set aside. She had received a fraction of what her original plan had targeted. Her attorney, Garrett Finch, had not taken her follow-up calls for long. She was working in marketing consulting now, independent, out of a shared office in Midtown. Vincent Howell had left the Nashville real estate market sometime in February. Solomon had heard this from Marcus, who mentioned it the way he mentioned everything, without emphasis, as a piece of information that was accurate and complete and required nothing further from anyone. On a Saturday morning in May, Solomon was on the porch of the East Nashville house with the first coffee of the day, watching the light come through the oaks in the way it did on Saturday mornings, without any obligation to arrive quickly, settling into the yard in long, unhurried columns. Diana was inside. He could hear the radio she kept on low when she was reading, a habit he had come to like without ever mentioning it. One of the oaks had a branch that was going to need attention before summer. He had already planned how to address it. He thought about his grandmother. He thought about the front room with the notary stamp and the ledger and the 2 sentences she had repeated until they became the grammar of how he understood the world. He thought about how she had run her small business with the same principles he had scaled into something larger and more complicated, because the principles did not change at scale, only the numbers did. Information was the only currency that didn't lose value. You couldn't rush the picture into focus. You had to let it develop. He drank his coffee. The light settled further into the yard. Down the street, a neighbor's dog came out onto a porch and looked at the morning with the placid satisfaction of a creature that had no unfinished accounts. He was free. He was whole. He had built something that could not be taken from him because the foundation of it was not paper, it was understanding. And he had been building that particular foundation since before he knew it had a name. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.